Mike, take it away.
Thanks, Rusty. I was just telling Rusty a minute ago when we first met, I got out of Colorado State University in 1975 with an animal science degree. I was totally industrial ag. I had been brainwashed by this university, this land-grant university whose mission was to build farm and ranch communities and healthy economies around our family farmers and ranchers that had been captured essentially by the industrial ag, big agribusiness companies. That happened to me in 1975. It had already occurred back then. And so an animal, the word animal husbandry was not even in the vocabulary. And so it took me a while to get it. It took a while. I went ahead and I went back to St. Francis, Kansas, which is on the Colorado-Kansas border. I built a 14,000 head feedlot. Left there about 8 years later. I built my own 12,000 head feedlot. And then I really started to get how these big meat packers have been rigging the market, fixing the prices, managing the market rather than competing in it, how they're cooperating with one another, and how they're just driving us out of business. And in fact, we're not doing nothing but playing a fool's game in agriculture. And so I decided to start Ranch Foods Direct in about 2000. I got it in 1998 when the big packers blackballed me. I couldn't sell my cattle anymore. Emptied out our cattle operation and ended up starting Ranch Foods Direct as this sort of alternative in 2000. And so as the alternative, I certainly wasn't going to go to you guys and say, hey, you should buy my meat because you should feel sorry for me. The big packers have been picking on me and I can't sell my cattle. By the way, it's just like the meat you get at Walmart. Full of whatever, you know the story, right? And so you ask the question, how in the world did we ever get into this industrial model of agriculture? How could thinking people ever get into this place? And I think the answer is, during my education at Colorado State University, the primary message was, agriculture is a business. It is not a way of life. If you have a problem with that, get out, because you got to get big to be efficient. And I love what Judy said this morning about how our economy is too masculine and not enough feminine. It's too much about efficiency and not enough about nurturing. Nailed it, absolutely on the head. And that is exactly how we get pigs in crates, chickens in battery cages, and how we even abuse the people. As St. Francis once said, you know, the way men treat animals are very, very likely the way they treat other men. And absolutely, the only way you can industrialize agriculture is to remove the family farmer and the family rancher. Well, I'm all about bringing them back. And I've been working on it. Aaron and I and many others have been working on this for about 14 years. And, you know, it's hard. It's really, really hard. But it's got to be around humane practices. Not only to the animals, but to the people. And I've really enjoyed working with the Humane Society on the Ag Council here in Colorado. And really it's about a humane economy. Not only we're going to treat these animals better, but we're going to treat people better as well.
Carrie?
And Mike, since you stood up, I'll stand up too. And again, it's Carrie Balkcom, and I'm the Executive Director of the American Grassfed Association. And I did the same thing. I left the farm and went to the land-grant college, and the one that I went to was the University of Florida. And my family, my dad had a degree in agricultural economics and engineering, and my mother was a biology major, and they said, get as far away from farming as you can. They wanted me to do something different, to get away from the farm, because they were generational farmers. My grandfather, my great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather all were cattle people. So I went to the University of Florida and decided to do something different, and all of a sudden realized, well into my career, that I didn't need to do that anymore. I needed to get back to what I knew and realize that I was an imprinted farmer, rancher. That the path that I had taken to get away from the farm was leading me back to the farm, because the path that I had taken to get away from the farm was food. And the more that I realized the people that I were dealing with, chefs and restaurateurs, knew nothing about food, nothing. And I found myself one day about 25 years ago on a beautiful little goat farm in Southern California, slogging through wet goat crap with a bunch of chefs, well-known chefs in the country, and realizing they had no idea where their food came from. And I said, I'm going to change the way I'm living, I'm going to change what I'm doing, and I'm going to get back into agriculture in a big way. And the only way that I knew how to do that was to start realizing the lessons that Mike has now realized, that we can't do that without putting the American family farmer back in agriculture. The key word there being agriculture. So when American Grass-Fed was formed in 2003, I was at that meeting, and I've been there ever since. People keep asking me when I'm going to retire, and I keep going, from what? This is my life. This is what I'm going to do until they tell me, they drag me off and tell me I can't do it anymore. So you're kind of stuck with me. American Grass-Fed was started in 2003 when the USDA said we're going to start a grass-fed label claim, the little thing you can put on your label that says, you know, what is in your meat, and you're going to be able to say you're grass-fed if you feed your animal 80% grass, but you can feed it 20% grain. You can give it antibiotics, you can give it hormones, and you can confine it and feed it in confined feeding and call it grass-fed. I don't know about you, but the little pastoral picture of animals grazing on pasture, that didn't quite make me sit real well with me. So we worked with the USDA until 2007 to make sure that we could get some kind of meaningful claim on the label. And the USDA finally came back and said, we're going to address only what the animal eats. We're going to say it has to have a 100% forage-based diet, but then we're not going to address where it's fed, how it's fed, antibiotics, hormones. And by the way, we're going to put this little caveat at the bottom of it that says, if you feed grain, keep a record of it. Doesn't tell you what to do with it. Doesn't say you have to take it out of the grass-fed pool. So we asked the USDA, so we said, well, if we can we start our own label claim? And they said, yes, if it meets or exceeds our standards. Okay. So we started, when you see a little green seal on a package of meat that says American grass-fed, that means that you know that that animal's been treated well, it's been fed 100% forage-based diet, that it has not been given antibiotics, that it has not been given hormones, and it has not been confined and fed. It's been treated humanely. And those are the 4 tenets of the American Grass-Fed Association. We work very closely with animal welfare groups. In fact, we work with Animal Welfare Approved. They do some of our audits on some of our farms with us. We work with the Humane Society. At this point, the only standards that we have are for ruminant animals, which are beef, bison, goat, and sheep. We're working on other standards, but we're going to have to. That's a long way to go, because pigs and chickens are not omnivores. They're herbivores. Not are herbivores. They're omnivores, and they like to pick up little things out of bugs and such. So we have to figure out how to work those standards out. That's kind of a synopsis of where I'm coming from. My former life was I was a certified chef. And so I bring to the conversation, as Paul will tell you, where my food comes from, and knowing how to cook that food, and how to talk to the consumer about how to cook that food. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Just to let you know, we have Jim Matheson from the National Bison Association here today, and he's a great resource when you want to know about bison and how they're raised here in the United States as well. And they're turning the herd on bison too, and putting more and more and more and more of them back on pasture, because there is a feedlot industry for bison as well, and they're working very hard to change that as well. But it's going to take all of us to do that. So that's me. I was vaccinated with a phonograph needle. I can talk to anybody at any time, so please, here I am, and I'm thrilled to be here, so thank you.
I work in the Rural Development and Outreach Program at the Humane Society of the United States. I'm the Market Development Coordinator. Our Rural Development and Outreach Program is about 2 years old now, so it's still fairly new. What we do is we celebrate farmers and ranchers who are humane, sustainable, and we work to connect them with our membership base who are looking for animal welfare-friendly products in the marketplace. We have 11 million members across the country. 95% of them eat meat, and so we try to educate them about learning about where that meat comes from, you know, asking the right questions, buying from traditional family farmers. Part of our program is a system of state agriculture councils, which I think Mike mentioned. Mike and Carrie are both on our Colorado Agriculture Council, along with 3 other farmers and ranchers. And they advise us on policy issues. They work with us to help open markets and remove barriers for family farmers. We're working on a beginning farmer program here in Colorado, helping a young pig farmer get started, and he'll be marketing into Whole Foods pretty soon. So those are some of the examples of the kind of work we're doing. We also work on policy. We work on issues, policy issues that are pro-family farmer, to help make CAPOs internalize the costs, environmental costs, animal welfare issues, human health issues. And we also work on eliminating certain practices. There are 4 that we're opposed to. One is the use of gestation crates for mother pigs. They're crates about 7 feet long and 2 feet wide, where the sow lives for her entire life and isn't even able to turn around. So we're working to phase those out. Barren battery cages for egg-laying hens, which, similar situation, several hens in a cage, given less space than the size of a sheet of paper to live their entire lives on. And then the other 2 are, we're working to phase out veal crates for veal calves and tail docking for dairy cattle.
Explain tail docking.
Oh, tail docking. So it's a practice that's already been condemned by the industry, and it's on its way out. But basically what happens is the tail of dairy cows are docked. There are old beliefs that it helps keep the animals clean and healthier, but science has shown that that's not actually true. And especially on large farms, I mean, cows have tails for a reason, and especially on large farms, I mean, there are flies, and they use the tails for swatting. It's an outdated practice that's inhumane, and there's no reason to continue doing it. So we're working to phase that out too. So that's pretty much it. A little summary of what we do.
And I have to tell you, I put Angela on the spot because Joe Maxwell was supposed to be here. And he's in Missouri, and he couldn't get here because of the ice storm. So about 6.5 minutes ago, I told Angela, I said, "You're going to speak today." So.
Yeah. So forgive me if I'm a little bit nervous. Thank you.
Good afternoon, or morning, I guess it still is. I'm really honored to be on this panel, so thank you. My name is Paul Reilly. I'm the executive chef and proprietor at Beast and Bottle, just up here on East 17th Avenue, uptown neighborhood between Clarkson and Washington. Beast and Bottle is, our hallmark is a nose-to-tail program that we do in-house butchery, mainly for local lamb and hogs. We're not big enough to do steers or bison like that, so they often don't make it onto our menu for that reason. Basically the way that Beast and Bottle was formed was out of a kind of an idea that my business partner is my sister, and I'm a New York native, and her and I were actually driving back to New York. It was for Thanksgiving a couple years ago, and we said there's, just driving through I-76 and there's ranches everywhere, and saying, who are these people? Why are we not buying meat from them? And why am I serving Australian lamb when there's Colorado lamb and the menus in Paris? How are we going to find these people? And I stumbled upon a wonderful woman. Actually, there's an event that goes on through a local restaurant group, Eat Denver. And every harvest year, they do something called Harvest Week in August and September, which is, they'll get local independent restaurants to feature menus of just Colorado products, which is harder than you think at times. But I met a woman whose name is Teresa Beamer at one of these events, and Teresa owns a 100-acre plot. It's called U Bet Ranch, U-E-W-E Bet Ranch, right outside of Loveland. And this woman she found me, I'd like to say, and basically she she found us. What she did is she took us in, and I mentioned to her, I want to start buying local, and she said, well, how come you're not? Why don't you buy whole animals? I had butchered a lamb probably since culinary school, but soon enough I bit the bullet, and this was at a previous restaurant, by the way, not Beast and Bottle, but and pretty soon we were bringing in whole 70-pound lambs, probably about 2 a week, and turning them into anything. And this idea of partnering with a family-run ranch is what basically was the catalyst for opening a restaurant concept that just did it, and our relationship with these people, with this family. So, so that's kind of how I got to be Beast and Bottle. And what we do now is we try and, obviously local is locavore is a buzzword, and we try and do it as much as we can. In the height of the season, August, September, you bet 90% of our menu is going to be sourced locally. Right now, it's obviously a little more difficult. But we always have stuck to local lambs and local hogs, local chicken, local eggs. And lo and behold, the stuff that we find that is the best tasting, it happens to be from small family-run ranches. And our partnerships with these families and ranches are the hallmark of what we do at Beast and Bottle now. And I love what Carrie was saying about food detachment. Because part of what we do at Beast and Bottle too is try and educate and let people know where their food's coming from. And you'd be shocked how they just misinformation that the dining guest has. And it's tough on our part to say, because you can be, it's tough not to educate without dictating and saying this is how you need to eat. We're more superior than you because we know and you don't. But it really is. It's hard to see how they just don't know that this animal was once alive. It has edible parts from its nose to its tail. And people have been doing this for centuries, we just don't do it in America. So, like I said, I'm really excited to be here. It's kind of my spiel on the whole thing. And again, thanks again.
Dana.
So I was a little late. I don't know if you guys talked about the antibiotic issue much.
Not at all yet.
Could somebody speak to kind of the general antibiotic issue and the movement to kind of change that as well?
Can people in the back hear the question? Would you like me to repeat the question? Okay, the question, you can hear it? Okay, good. Who would like to address that first?
Antibiotics are a crutch for industrial agriculture. The more you confine animals and stress them, the more that they need antibiotics to produce and to grow. And so when you have a feedlot like the Conagra, formerly Montfort, then Swift, now JBS Brazilian-owned feedlots, the Five Rivers companies that have over 100,000 animals in one place, you really do need antibiotics to keep these animals alive. The other thing that requires the antibiotics is when you're feeding high-grain rations and those rumens are acid, and they get a problem called acidosis. They bloat, they die, and if they feed antibiotics in the form of either Rumensin or Bovatec, the ionophores, and Tylenol to address liver abscesses, they get away with that. And so when you threaten to take away the antibiotics, and I'm not talking about therapeutic antibiotics where an animal gets sick and you treat it and it's back healthy again and nursing its mother and it's going to eventually be a good steak on a plate. I'm talking about subtherapeutic antibiotics where there's a lot of resistance developed now among the bacteria that we're trying to control, and it's becoming less useful now for human use. It's just an overuse of antibiotics to support a model of production that's very, very industrial. And so it's just too bad that we have to legislate these kinds of things. It's too bad that our food system has gotten so far off its track of husbandry and stewardship that we actually have to tell corporate CEOs how their animals should be treated. But this is what we have to do. And so we're working very hard to address this antibiotic issue. You know, there's bills that have been written to ban the subtherapeutic use of antibiotics. And I got to tell you that the industrial ag boys, the pharmaceutical companies, the vet schools, Kansas State University's got a guy down there that's just crazy about anybody telling anybody else what to do. That's their basic argument. When everything else runs out, it's don't tell me what to do. You know, it's kind of like this is a free country. You know, don't tell me what to do. And so it's a real battle, Dana. But I think we're going to win this. If you take that crutch away, those sows are out of those gestation crates, and those feedlots are no longer 100,000 head operations. It just won't support it. So.
Would somebody else on the panel like to address antibiotics? Carrie?
Well, the use of antibiotics in animal agriculture, if you have a sick animal, you treat it, it gets healthy, it moves on, it's fine. And when you have baby calves and stress and mamas and that kind of thing, there's a real good use of antibiotics as long as it's a necessary use. The other side that Mike didn't talk about is that once you have all those antibiotics that you're pumping in daily, I mean, it's whether you need it or not, you're getting it, you know. And so what happens to all that antibiotic when it leaves the animal? It goes into a waste system, which then, because it's a large confined feeding operation, then something has to be done with it. So you've got these big, what they call lagoons, manure lagoons. That kind of, I don't want to go into a lagoon full of manure, but the last lagoon I was in was Roytan. It was really pretty, but it wasn't full of manure. Anyway, so you've got all this antibiotic that's creeping into your soils. It's creeping into your whole existence of what you're doing. It's getting into everything that we have. So it's not benign use. I mean, so there is a cost to you, whether you like antibiotics, if you're buying antibiotic-free meat, if they're still allowing antibiotics in that use, unfettered use, then you're still getting them, okay? So you have to kind of see that regardless of whether you were buying antibiotic-free meat, unless it's kind of regulated a little bit more or gotten rid of a little bit more, you're still getting them in some way. So that's the other thing. As far as antibiotic residue in the meat, that's not the issue. The issue is the cost to the environment. And the Pew Foundation, Food and Water Watch, Humane Society, several other big, they're all working to get the subtherapeutic prophylactic use of antibiotics out of animal agriculture. But the other thing we have to be cautious of is it's going to have to be a drawdown. Because if tomorrow, everybody in the world said, we're not going to use those anymore, then what's going to happen is the animals that are still in confinement are going to suffer. Because if you take the tool away that the man is using now to keep those animals in confinement, then that animal will suffer. So it has to be a drawdown. We have to get more access to market for animals out of that are not being confined and fed gestational crates, battery cages, confinement feeding operations. And that's where you all come in to say, no, we're not going to buy that anymore. That's the thing you see on the bumper sticker on my car, and I'm a 60s, 70s person, so I like bumper stickers, is vote with your fork. What you put in your mouth. And it drives me crazy. I don't have children, but I see these kids everywhere, and you'll go buy them a $120 bicycle helmet and a $3 value meal. So, anyway, there was a question over here.
Well, just to follow up on that, from a regulatory perspective or policy perspective, what does that look like? Because in Europe, it sounds like they have, if you want to get an antibiotic as a farmer or rancher, you have to actually go have a prescription written. And the other follow-up to that is the pharmaceutical industry is so powerful that it seems like anytime you go into this realm, it's, it's crazy. But as a parent, or just as a person, I'd like to see antibiotics stay effective for all of us. If we have surgery, that we survive it, that we don't have, horrible staph infections or MRSA afterwards. So I guess what is the talk right now in the policy realm of how do we withdraw it from this system?
Well, the first thing that you're going to have to do is you're going to have to convince people that you're going to have the stocking ratios in the big feedlots is going to have to come way, way, way down. And the other thing is you're going to have to take the mindset that if it's not sick, give it a pill. If you're not sick, you don't need a pill. So if you're not sick, and you're going to have to take it out of the feed. Now, there is some legislation right now through Pew and through Food and Water Watch to make these large confinement feeding operations be responsible enough to have a veterinarian sign off on getting the antibiotics. So, because right now you can go to the feed store and get poultry feed with antibiotics in it. So if you can't get them from your doctor, you go to the feed store and get them. So it's going to make the veterinarians who work for these large companies responsible for the amount of antibiotics that they're giving. And there's lots of legislation out there right now, and I would suggest that you go to Food and Water Watch's website, Pew Foundation. Humane, have you got anything on your website?
Not right now,
Not
not
yet.
yet.
All right, so Pew and Food and Water Watch are the two on that one. Yes, ma'am?
So I think there was something in the title of this section, and maybe I'm wrong, that talked about how humane practices and careful animal husbandry practices also impact the earth or the environment. You talked a little bit about lagoons and that sort of thing, but is there any way that you can talk a little bit about like intensive grazing practices and how that's being used to try to restore land that has been overgrazed or misgrazed or not grazed for decades?
Well, that's, Mike and I can both address that, is that animals that are on pasture, and if you look at the Savory Institute and you look at Holistic Management Institute, and they say that to increase stocking ratios on land to allow the animal to actually plow that land, furrow that, keep that land moving, keep that land alive with microbes and stuff, to allow that the excrement that they're putting back on it to break down through the microbes in the soil to regenerate everything. So the humane practices, where taking animals and putting them back on pasture, will allow that to happen. The humane practices, animals on pasture don't need all of these other things and stuff. They do very well. So, your turn.
Mike, be interested in
Yeah.
yours.
You know, I talk about, I've really grown to dislike the word sustainable. When I heard that year, a couple years ago, the Broadmoor, the Grocery Manufacturers Association was meeting, which are the masters of the food universe that all fly in their $30 million plus jets and meet at the Broadmoor. Walmart was presenting on sustainability. And so I really don't like that word very much. And so I like to talk about a restorative approach. And animals are an absolute key to the restoration of healthy grasslands. The proper management of those animals. And moving them in herds, like Alan Savory talks about it. Go to the TED Talks and look up Alan Savory. That is a really great presentation. And we've got some work here, even in Colorado, around that. And in our operation in St. Francis, Kansas, we follow that kind of a grazing program. And the first thing that had to happen in our operation in St. Francis is a tornadoes. We had a big storm cloud that came through with 4 tails coming out of it, and every one of our windmills were blown down flat and ruined and destroyed. Oh, that was terrible, wasn't it? Until we realized that now we get to put in a watering system that has 2-inch pipelines throughout all of the pastures, and now we get to really intensively graze because we can mob graze, because water is not a problem anymore. But the other thing that I wanted to address on getting back to more humane agriculture is this sort of Carrie, you call it the drawdown. Okay, Smithfield, which is now a Chinese company, says, well, we're out of these gestation crates by 2020. Basically what they're saying is we're never out of these gestation crates because it doesn't fit eliminating them doesn't fit our model. The other thing you've got to know is the farmers are gone. The farmers were driven off the land and they've been replaced by refugee workers. Whether they're foreign refugee workers, as Judy talked about from Mexico, or whether they're domestic refugee workers who aren't farmers, but they're going out to be these low-wage workers. These workers are as abused as the animals, and they take it out on the animals. It's sort of a transfer of anger and suffering from the people who are doing this work, and in conditions you can't tolerate as a human being. And so we've got to bring our farmers back. It's going to take a lot of time. When industrial agriculture moved in, They wiped out the infrastructure. We just lost our packer in Colorado Springs. GNC Packing Company has been around since 1859. They're gone. We lack access to the marketplace. Cisco's buying U.S. Foods, the second biggest food service company in America. Cisco's the biggest. Hey, Justice Department, FTC, when are you going to get it? This is not competition. This is not a good marketplace that allows easy access by producers. So it's a predatory marketplace. So we've got so much work to do here. Everybody's got to come together. We need better government policy. Yes, sir.
I wonder if anyone could speak to the status of ag-gag laws in the U.S., maybe particularly in Colorado. Tell us, maybe some people might need to be educated on what they are and what the status might be nationally.
Sure. Last year we had,
Tell them what that gag law is.
an ag-gag law is a law that requires, they come in various forms. Some say you're not allowed to lie on an application, so an animal activist couldn't lie on the application. They would have to say, I work with the Humane Society of the United States. They would have to put that on their application, and then they're not going to get hired. Or other ways they do it is they say you're not allowed to take any pictures on the premises, any pictures or videos. So that's an ag-gag law. It basically prohibits undercover investigations. So, when undercover videos come out and people are educated about these abuses on the farms, rather than correcting the problems on the farms, they're saying no more pictures, no more advocates in here. They just want to cover it up. So that's what those are about. We had several pop up last year, I think 6 or 7, and they were all vetoed. So last year we managed to pull them off. This year, I think just today, the governor in Idaho signed an ag-gag law, and my understanding, I'm not based here in Colorado and I do market development work, but my understanding is that there's a bill being proposed here in Colorado. Yeah, an ag-gag law is being proposed here in the state. So if you'd like to talk with us afterward, if you'd like to get involved in opposing that, we would love the help.
Anybody else on the panel want to address anti-gag?
I'd like to.
Let's go Carrie and then Mike.
With us today, this gentleman's been sitting over taking pictures. Well, they're going on farms. Why is there a problem if you're farming that you can't go on there? The farmers that we work with have ag tourism. Will Harrison, Georgia has a sign on the thing, White Oak Pastures, Agro-Tourism Georgia. Every farmer that we work with all over the country invites people for farm day. Why do we need legislation to say you can't come on my farm and take a picture? Because they're not farms, they're factories. And they don't, and it's a tough situation. We allowed this to happen, so we have to unallow it to happen. So, and what Paul's doing with buying whole animals, and he knows the life cycle of that entire animal, why are we not allowed to know that? I mean, it's crazy.
And let me, before Mike gets it, it does exist here in Colorado because there are, at least I know, one frequent rancher at local farmers markets that they pull out all the I'm not going to name them, but they tell you everything you want to hear, all the buzzwords, and we, I contacted them, being a farmer's market shopper myself, and said, I'd like to know more about your product. Can I bring my chefs or my staff out there? So, absolutely not. We don't do work with them. They exist here.
Well, it's like Beyonce says, if you like it, put a ring on it.
So in Colorado, we just had our governor's ag conference this last week, right? Who was the keynote? Some guy from China? Or a U.S. guy that was an ambassador to China? I mean, this is crazy. What's that got to do with local agriculture and becoming self-reliant in our state? Colorado is one of the most industrial agriculture states anywhere in the world. We've got the Ogallala Aquifer that we're pumping dry to produce food for big agribusiness firms to export somewhere else, leaving poverty, environmental degradation behind. This is a state where we get to fix a big, big problem. Hey, we might need a new governor. Honestly, Hickenlooper was in my plant with his coat and his hat on and his knife in his hand. We helped him get elected. We put the video out about what a cool guy this is. He cares about farmers, ranchers, alternative food systems. Maybe he really doesn't. When he hires an ag commissioner like Salazar, who can't get enough of agriculture, industrial ag, we've got to make some change here in Colorado. So it's going to hit the ballot. You're also going to see something hit the ballot that's going to be a tail docking bill. We're going to have to start telling dairy farmers that aren't farmers anymore, remember, they're factory people, how to treat their cows. Is there any reason in the world that a cow should only live to produce milk 2.5 to 3 lactations? When a cow that's humanely treated and cared for can go 8, 9, 10, even 12 years? What is going on here? So yeah, we're going to have to tell these people how to behave.
Who's got another question? I have a couple hands in the back, ma'am, in the corner.
You hit on a little bit. Can you talk about scale? Because it often has negative connotations, but if it's done the right way, it's also a way to help move things forward.
Are you talking about the scale of a farmer?
Correct.
See, whenever I hear somebody tell me that I have to scale up, I'm thinking I'm talking to the wrong people. I don't want to scale up. I want my community. I want to feed my community. I don't want to have to scale up, because then what happens? What Judy talked about the efficiency creeps into the head instead of the nurturing side over here. And so we go industrial instead of family farm, and we end up with that guy you met, Paul, that says, you're not coming to my farm. You know what? Because he doesn't have one. Because he's buying off a Tyson, or he's buying off a Smithfield, and he's repackaging perhaps. So I'm saying it needs to be family-sized scale. And this idea of having to be big to match your buyer is the story of McDonald's. It's the story of Tyson and IBP and Smithfield. They had to get big enough to match the big franchise. I'm saying that's the opposite direction we should go.
Would either of you like to address scale?
The only thing about scale is if you are a small family farmer and you have to get a certain amount for your animals to make a living, to be able to stay on that farm, and when the consumer comes to you at the farmer's market or at your farm and says, I can buy this for $3 less at Walmart, you're not doing true cost accounting. You're not factoring in all of the inputs that farmer has that Walmart doesn't have to pay. And I'm not going to pick on Walmart. It's anybody. It's King Soopers. It's anybody. You have to understand that farmer doesn't have any tax credits. They don't have the right to pollute without the EPA saying, because you're polluting, you have to pay for this. So you're paying for all of that. And I think that once we get the mindset of true cost accounting, and if you look at Wes Jackson at the Land Institute, what he said about true cost accounting and the real cost of food, then it becomes a little easier to understand.
Either of you want to address scale before we move on? Okay, next question. Ma'am, and then I'll come to you. Yes.
Yeah, can you just talk a little bit about rating systems like we see in Whole Foods, and whether that has much meaning, and maybe more generally just in terms of what we can do as consumers, especially related to chicken and pork, but just generally.
The GAP rating at Whole Foods, if Joe were here, he could speak to that because he works very closely with GAP, and he is GAP rated to go into Whole Foods. Whole Foods started with a really great system, Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. I find it horribly confusing because you can have grass-fed and be a Tier 3, and and it's access to pasture and stuff. It's a start, but again, you can have commoditized beef and still have a GAP rating. So I think the thing for you all to do when you do go into Whole Foods is say, is it grass-fed? Is it certified grass-fed? If it's not, why are you letting it come in here? And again, it's a start. But again, it's not, if it's rated 1, then what is rated 1? Tell me what that means. And the meat guys at Whole Foods really want to work through this. I mean, they see me coming, and I know there's a picture of me back in the background. It says, oh crap, she's here again. You know, why do you sell grass-fed when it's only, 3 and it's access to pasture? That's not really what it's supposed to be limited. You know, so I think that the ratings are good. It's a start, and I think that their intentions were good. And it's making people more aware, but I think it needs to go a little bit further. I think that there has to be some truth in that I'm not seeing yet. Okay.
Do either of you want to address anything on rating? Oh, it looks like everybody. Let's start on the end and work our way this way.
Well, in regards to the hogs that you're saying, I know that Whole Foods, Front Range Whole Foods, I'm not sure if it's all of them, but I know specifically Cherry Creek, I-25 in Washington, I'm not going to go through them all, but they have a Colorado Berkshire program. And this is, it's one of the guys that we've used in the past at Beast and Bottle. But I don't get his hogs as much as I'd like to, because he has a kind of exclusivity with Whole Foods now, which is wonderful for him. But those, I know for a fact that if you're in their Colorado Berkshire program, you're getting an extremely responsibly raised local product.
Angela?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what they were both saying. With Global Animal Partnership, the 5-step program, so it's 1 through 5, 5 being the very best standard. With level 1, with hogs, gestation crates are not allowed. So, you know, it's just an entry point, and it's the lowest level. You know, it's not the best, but it tells you something. And it also gives farmers incentive to step up in the scale once they're in the program. And then there are some other good animal welfare certifiers, animal welfare approved, certified humane, American grass-fed. So we promote all of those to our members, especially when you're not able to get out to the farm and meet the farmer yourself. It's a good way to, it's another way to find out, you know, how those animals were treated.
Mike, are you going to address rating?
Informed consumers really do want to do the right thing. After you've seen Food Inc., you're either going to not eat anymore, or you're going to try to figure out how to buy smarter. But the thing is, do these rating systems, are they accurate? Are they trustworthy? Or are they just letting the big company sort of look good to the city or to the consumer? Exactly. And so you look at the big rating above the meat counters. Hey, that's cool. And then when you start looking at the meat that's in it, it's not rated, not rated, not rated. Oh, we have some Lassiter. Yeah, but he's only got this much space in the counter. Why? Well, because a lot of these companies are developing protocols not to buy what you produce, so that you can't meet their protocol. It's impossible to meet their protocol. And so they have no other choice. So sad, so unfortunate that they now have to buy from Tyson and JBS. Darn, I wish you guys could produce what we need. Well, you can't, because of the protocol that they've developed around that. And the other problem we've got is we've got huge corporations out there, national corporations, that have a marketing department that has actually never met the people over in operations. So what they're selling is not even close to what they're putting on the plate. And we've got it, and that's a big problem among the shareholder groups whose primary responsibility is increasing shareholder return rather than what's good for community, people, and our society.
Okay, we've got about 10 minutes left. You had a question, then I'll come back over here.
So one of the awesome things about what Paul is doing at Beast and Bottle is that he's using the whole animal. And when she mentioned scale, I think that's one of the other things that some people don't understand is that in the statistics about how many cattle we would have to raise in order to feed every American, you know, X amount of beef every single day or even every single week, they're only taking into account the muscle meat. Whereas Paul is using nose to tail, he's using the entire animal. That completely changes the calculations. But how do we get more restaurants, how do we get more people to cook in that way, to use the animal in that way, rather than just saying, oh, well, here's a steak, the best cut of steak, and oh, by the way, the rest of the animal went to waste. So, you know, how do we change that conversation?
We teach people to cook in the home. I mean, people say that in my family, there are 3 daughters. If you left cooking up to either of my 2 sisters, we'd all starve. You know, it takes them both an hour to make minute rice. It has to start at home. We have to teach people to cook again. And chefs are now taking the entire animal and they're braising and they're stewing and they're doing all these other things. Don't expect a steak every time. I mean, the steak is this much of the animal. And it drives me crazy when you go to a big charity event or some big thing where all the chefs are there, and there's some chef who's ordered in 100 pounds of tenderloin. Do you know how many animals had to be slaughtered to have 100 pounds of tenderloin? What's happened to the rest of that food? So we have to teach chefs to know how, all chefs, is don't put a steak on the menu, put beef on the menu. And make the beef case look more like the seafood case or the cheese case. You know, variety, type, all of these different cuts and things. Learn how to cook with them, and I think that's really important. That you've got to start at home, and you've got to start to learn to cook again. And we've got to get away from the fast food thing, and otherwise it makes no sense. The other thing is too is that for the gap rating, and this is the argument that I'm going to give for the Global Animal Partnership, is that it's a rating so you can step up. Well, quite frankly, if you've spent the $1,500 for the audit to get into Whole Foods, and you've gone through all the hoops, and you've gone through all the paperwork and everything, and you're selling into Whole Foods, the incentive is not there for you to step up. There is no economic incentive for you to get better. If Whole Foods wants you to step up, then make it incentivize it so that when you do step up, you get more money.
Paul, would you like to come back and address?
I think you made a really question that a lot of people don't want to answer, and it is how do we do this? And Carrie's point about going back into cooking is terrific, and I think it is happening slowly. You know, I think especially in my world, these kind of the homemaker chefs that you see on television, like the Rachel Rays and the Sandra Lees of the world, are very easy targets, but you know what? They've got people cooking, again, simple, comforting things at home. That's why I put a lot of value on who they are. Another idea, I think, in terms of what you were saying is, I would look to the Latino market specifically, because a lot of that, you know, when you're talking about a 600-pound steer, 20 pounds of it is for tenderloin, there's a lot of other meat on that animal that's not getting used. And if you go into a carniceria or places like that, the Latino markets do a terrific job of using those offcuts and making them delicious. And American palates love Mexican food, specifically here in Colorado. So I think that that's another way that you know, another idea, kind of like American immigrant food, if you will. I mean, look how that's Italian immigrant food is part of the American canon now. I think it'll shift towards Mexican cuisine in that sense too. And then the last part of it I'd say too is, you know, we at Beast and Bottle, we say we're approachable nose to tail. So, you know, you're not going to come in and every scene it's going to be liver this and heart that. Those things absolutely make their way into the menu because we have to use them. But, you know, with every lamb I get one heart. That's not going to feed 65 people coming in for dinner that evening. So we find ways that are familiar to use those cuts to the American palate. If you like heart, if you like tenderloin, you're probably going to love heart. It's the same exact texture. So it's to answer your question, we have to completely restart. It's gotten to the point of Mayday, and now it's up. It's going to take a project of the consumer, the rancher, the chef, whoever, to completely restart the system, re-educate American palates. Go from there.
Okay, did you have anything to add on that, or should we move on to the next question?
I was just going to add really quickly, actually 23% of all animal products are wasted, thrown away. So
That's obscene.
I love what Paul's doing and Carrie's suggestion about cooking at home, you know. In addition to that, there needs to be changes at the institution level, in cafeterias and hospitals, buffets. Those are big sources of waste. So that's just another facet of that issue.
Okay. So we got 5 minutes. I'd like to get your 2 questions. So sir over here, See if we can get them, and then we'll just limit the response to one person for this question.
I'll probably throw it back to you on the scaling kind of idea. It does seem like part of the chicken and the egg kind of conundrum here as far as supply versus demand for these products that are raised humanely in various forms, specifically eggs. Cage-free eggs are already there's supply issues. And trying, as a growing restaurant, trying to find these products and shortages or issues in getting them. So, to scale, maybe it's not bigger farms, but more of them. I mean, what's the strategy? How do you see being able to help? Because the mainstream is ideas, and people like this. You gotta have supply.
How do we get over the hump, Mike?
Well, and when we talk about scaling, I think you stay within the family farm structure on land you own. You don't go out and buy all the neighbors up and think you're going to get a bigger farm. Because honestly, in the last 30 years, you have not been able to trust that you actually have access to the marketplace. I mean, a big company can come in and say, hey, if you grow it, we'll buy it, and you do, and they dump you. You're done. You're bankrupt. Grandma's money's even gone. I mean, everybody's money's gone. And so what we've done in Colorado Springs, we're working on a public marketplace. And it's virtual, not just bricks and mortar, although that's important. But we want to really create a place where people have a lot of access to the marketplace. From the 400 produce producers in the Arkansas Valley to livestock producers, to cheese, to eggs, to all these things, to where you've got a big marketplace that if you lose one customer, you've got another. And your market becomes much bigger. But we're better than Colorado Springs, the most dysfunctional city on the planet when it comes to food. So that's going to be our answer for our area down there.
Okay, then this gentleman.
Just quickly, question. You guys have been on the front lines of everything, but I was wondering if you know of any regulatory movement in relation to BSD or BGH in the United States to maybe catch up with the EU.
Can anybody respond to that?
Is there anything happening?
You know what you mean as far as banning the use of it?
Yeah, are we just stuck with the labeling laws, or is there any?
Excuse me. Yeah, I don't know if we're going to get it banned, but hey, you guys have all said you don't want it.
So stop buying it.
And that has really worked. And when you consider how it works and what happens to the cow when you inject the RBGH and all of that, people are so offended. And of course they don't want to feed it to their children, especially a young mother and father with a newborn. It's really worked. That's been an example of consumer protest. And all it takes is a little bit, because these big companies are so sensitive to their image. So we got to keep that kind of work up. But the RBGH, boy, you'd hate to own that business. You know, it's sold right away. Monsanto sold it to Elanco because they didn't want it anymore. They didn't want the bad publicity around it. So we've done a really good job. Now we need to do it with GMOs.
So I'd like to give the panelists one chance, and if you got anything else you want to say, we'll start with Paul on the end.
I kind of wanted to touch on something that Mike said too about that word sustainable, and just how out of hand it's gotten right now. Like you're saying that Whole Foods is, or I'm sorry, that Walmart is kind of jumping on the sustainable bandwagon. Part of our education at Beast and Bottle goes to sea as well, and serving responsible products from the ocean. And right now you hear sustainable seafood everywhere. I mean, everyone uses that term. Well, meeting with some oyster farmers out in Maine, he said how ridiculous that term is, because think about it. For every fish you catch, you're not throwing one back into the ocean. And I think the term that I'd like to hear everybody start using is responsible, and instead of sustainable or green. And those terms have just gotten so out of hand. And really, it's the responsible ranchers and farmers that are going to be paving the way forward. And I think also, kind of touching on everything we do here, we say, don't, like we were talking about before, don't buy those products. That's what works. Well, that's really easy for everybody in this room to say that. We're all here we all have an interest in this. It's educating other people on this. If you want to say, lower classes or whoever, but they're the ones that are still, like you hear over and over again. You could buy a $20 chicken at Whole Foods, or you can feed a family of 5 at McDonald's for classes. So we got to find out a way to get those people on the same bandwagon that we're on.
Angela, any closing comments? Okay, Carrie?
Two things. When you talk about the education thing, and Dana's here, is that how many of you are aware of the slow food movement? Okay, well, slow food is educating. The school gardens, starting in the schools, even adult education. Any kind of a movement that you can do. Slow has gotten a great hold here in Colorado, and I would suggest they're having their annual meeting next week at the Source. So if you want to learn more about it, then go there. The other thing that I want to tell you, and I'm going to embarrass him when I tell you this, is that this little rabble-rouser over here to my left, he sued the big packers. He took them on at his own expense, and he won. He won. Big clap. It was about the time that Oprah came out with the beef thing, and it was a real weird time with the food, but he was on the forefront of the lines. He put his personal money up to win that suit, and he won. And they took him to the Supreme Court, and he lost because they were going to hear one case that day. It was either Mike's case or Anna Nicole Smith's. And that's where it starts. The Supreme Court, he lost at the Supreme Court because of that. And this man took the big packers to task and won. And the Supreme Court said, we want to hear Anna Nicole more than you. So it's you got a real hero right here.
Thanks. Thank you, Carrie. Zero, any last comments?
Carrie, I like Paul, I really like your idea of the responsible thing. So I think about words like restorative and responsible. You've got to remember that, Aaron. Those are two really important words. But honestly, every word we've ever come up with, they've co-opted.
Yeah.
I mean, so get ready to figure out a new word. But here's something that I wanted to mention. There is a new book recently published. Last Wednesday it hit bookshelves. It's called The Meat Racket. It's written by Christopher Leonard, who works with the New America Foundation out of D.C. Barry Lynn wrote the book Cornered about monopoly capitalism, the destructive nature of monopoly capitalism. They've done awesome work on the beef checkoff. They talked about the beef tax and how big beef is co-opted and taken over the beef checkoff stuff. This is a cool outfit, this New America Foundation. So I really recommend you get a copy of the book. It's all over the news. Industrial agriculture has probably never been more angry about a book. They're being attacked on this. It's been, I've heard a couple of NPR segments. I've seen a Wall Street Journal segment that was actually friendly to the book, unbelievably. But this is a book that is the next step forward in understanding how industrial agriculture works. And honestly, after you get through the first chapter, you're so angry. You are so angry at Tyson. How could they have done this? And so, thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
Well, let's give a hand to the panelists. In my line of work at the university, sustainable's dead. The new word is resiliency. Community resiliency, food resilient, that seems to be the buzzword.